Alright, we're getting ready to make our cuts on our chassis. Isn't a very difficult thing to do. I measured about 2 inches from the rear, made my cut lines, and I'm going to use the Dremel with a cutoff disc to cut this in half, and then we're going to show you how to put it back together. Well, now we've cut our chassis in half. All that work just to cut it in half, but that's okay. You can clean the edges up with a regular flat file. You can just clean them up, even them out, and deburr them on the outside. For the inside, I just like using a small little rat tail file just to clean out the flashing on the inside. Now to join these two together, we're going to use good old music wire. Stock number 506 3/32 music wire by K&S. Now, I know a lot of people use this for a variety of reasons. I buy this by the mile. This works great for front axles, for joining these chassis together. It saves a lot of money for guys on a tighter budget like myself, even though that these are frowned upon for using as axle material. Straight is straight. They're not the hardest metal, but they do work for a front axle. I've used them in almost every car I've built. Never had an issue. As long as you cut them and roll them and they're straight and true, they're going to get the job done. But they also get the job done for a variety of other things like this chassis. So we're going to cut some pieces of this, put it inside, and then we're going to get to the setting of the length and soldering. I want to talk a little bit about tinning, pre-tinning parts. When I'm using the K&S music wire like this, I always pre-tin it with solder. So I have heated it up using my iron, and I put a little bit of solder on the end of this, just coated it lightly. You can just barely see it, but I like to do that because the rod takes a little bit longer to heat up, and this way whenever I put it in the brass and I add a little bit of solder, it'll connect very quickly, and that's what I want. So just a little tip in case you didn't know about it. This comes in handy for brass parts and other items as well, but just thought I'd share it with you. Now we're moving on. So to get the alignment to match the body, I place the body over the chassis and I align the front to match the body. Double check, make sure the rear is matched. But since the front is what's movable, I move it and adjust it until it's as close as it can get. That looks pretty centered to me. Then I make sure that my front axle is still straight and true. And we are ready to solder. One thing about using custom bodies, like mine, is that sometimes the bodies are not perfectly symmetrical and molded. You'll notice there's a little bit of gap difference here in the fenders. That's okay. I know the chassis is aligned. I know it's centered. I know that's where it's supposed to be. Our sanding barrel can adjust these a little bit to make the car look good. I've never had an issue before. I doubt I'll have one now. Something to think about. This way, when you solder your chassis, like I've already done, you know that your chassis is still flat and true and in alignment. I didn't have to move it very much. As you can see, this step is not something that everyone is going to want to do, but I like that micro adjustability, as I call it, to set this to the particular car I'm using. And again, you can recycle this chassis at another given point if you need to. So now we're going to move on to our side rails, and we're getting very close. Okay, time to make our side mounting pans. I'm using K&S 8236 brass strip, 0.25 times a half. This is heavy enough, solid enough to make a body mount. Now the way I do it is I'm measuring the length of the body. I don't want to go too long. I don't want to crowd the rear tire. So I use the chassis pins, the mounting pins here for the board. And this is about as far forward as I want it to be, and back here. So when I do that, then I can just take my little Sharpie, make a mark, and now I know where to cut my pans. I'll cut both of them evenly, and we'll show you how to mount them. Okay, to check the width of our plates, I mount the chassis, wheels and tires. I just lay it in the body, and then I can easily mark the area where I have to trim if need be. I like to use this width of brass. I keep a lot of it in stock because it varies from body to body how much you're going to need, but I like to have a full amount right here to solder to for strength, and then I can easily just trim it away. You can use different sizes if you want. I just like this size, and I can custom cut it to fit a variety of chassis. But now you can see what we're going to do here is we're going to get this soldered in place, and we're going to trim that away. So I mark the line using a straight edge on the brass, and it allows me to align the brass mounting plate, the pan on the frame rails. I really like using these very inexpensive battery clamps for holding things. They work great. I got one at each end. What I'm going to do is I'll solder this, and then I will go ahead and use my cutting disc and cut off the excess and then file it clean. You can cut it beforehand. I just find it easier to do it this way. Well, we are finally finished. The last thing that I did was I added some square tubing here. It's the same tubing that we've used for the frame rails, and little pieces right here to hold the guide wires, help keep them secure. Basically, it looks like this, and what we've really done is replicate this chassis pretty much almost identically, except they use a round tube here. I just use scrap tubing, whatever I have, but to keep it simple, right here, just the square tubing, and that's what you can create from this right in front of you. Very few minimal parts, and you can create this chassis. It's a very basic, very simplified inline chassis. There is certainly much more advanced examples out there that you've seen. I just like to keep things simple. If it works, it works. If you keep it straight and true and strong, you're probably going to end up with a very smooth running slot car. It's very quick, and such is the case here. Although I'm usually in last place, it's still smooth. So, but no, this is a pretty easy and basic chassis. I think any of you that's been thinking about taking the plunge and soldering and working with brass, I hope that this helps you, and I look forward to seeing some of your builds in the future.